subjectivists, but there's just no textual evidence for this, or there's very, very weak textual evidence. There's places where Nietzsche talks about valuing involving injustice, and it looks like he's talking about subjective value there. But I don't think injustice and falsity are quite the same thing. Here's what the injustice metaphor could mean other than false. So suppose a judge makes a decision in a court case based on his personal desire for the person to be in prison, rather than the objective facts of the case. We'd call that injustice. When your desires get into your judgments in a certain way, well, there is injustice of a certain kind showing up there. And this could be just a perfectly natural way to treat the injustice metaphor. This shows up in two places in Human All Too Human, which is one of Nietzsche's earliest works. This is just another wacky thing that he says there. There's a place where Hussein has he accurately cites Nietzsche saying that really nothing has value, and philosophers say otherwise are mistaken. But then, like Nietzsche in this is like Nietzsche at his most depressed. Okay, so he says, why are all claims about value false? Because mankind as a whole has no goals. And consequently, concerning the whole affair, man cannot find his comfort and support in it, but rather his despair. So, okay, I think this is Nietzsche getting so depressed that he stops being psychologically insightful, because people have goals and try to do things, maybe minor goals, maybe pathetic goals, but they have goals, you know. And the neat thing about this is subjectivism actually, if you are in the mood where you think nobody has any goals, subjectivism will then tell you, okay, then there is nothing of value. Because it's these goal-directed attitudes that give us our goals that make things valuable. And if for some reason you thought that nobody wanted anything, which would just be really strange, but if you did think that, okay, then subjectivism tells you, actually there's no value. Okay, but Nietzsche does not always think that. This is one of his earliest works. It's the work before, in fact, Daybreak, which he would later look back. Daybreak is the book where he, in Ecce Homo, when he sort of writes his autobiography, he says, "With daybreak, my campaign against morality begins." And there's a lot of interpreters who've said, yeah, what's going on in Human All Too Human, look, Nietzsche had these views, but he changes into, the mature views start, well, at least with Daybreak. Some people say further on. Basically, I'm willing to concede that early book to Hussein, maybe. I don't care about that so much. I want to get into, when Nietzsche writes what he later calls his greatest work, what's going on there? That's Zarathustra. If I have to give up Human All Too Human, no big deal. It would also just be really weird if anybody rejected the existence of this kind of non-moral subjective value. Because it really doesn't take a lot to make it. If people desire something, well, then there's non-moral subjective value on this construal of what it is. It's just the easiest kind of value to make. All you need is people to have desires, and I guess things in the world to fit those desires in some way or another. And then you have this kind of value. Denying that people have desires, or denying that anything in the world ever fits their desires, okay, those are really radical sort of claims to make. So it's just really easy to have this kind of non-moral subjective value, and we should be surprised and think, okay, Nietzsche would have to have some really big, complicated, interesting view on the basis of which to deny either that people had desires or that anything in the world ever fit their desires. That's why I don't think reading Nietzsche as someone who thinks, there are not even truths about this non-moral subjective value, I don't think that's a really good reading. Right. Okay. So now, let me just go to what I think is the deepest, criticism of all this, fictionalism stuff. Go back, if you look back at the passage from On Enjoying and Suffering the Passions, that, the person being described there, who says, this is my good, this I love, thus alone do I want the good, that person has this entirely clear-eyed awareness of the fact that it's just his passions that make things good. There's no pretending going on. He sees exactly how things are, and knows, yeah, this is valuable, and it's valuable just because of me. It's sort of honest, clear-eyed subjectivism, rather than error theory plus pretense. He sees the subjective facts as they are, and is totally okay with those. I think what's going on there is this person just has a really strong passion for something, and he's able to regard his love for it as a legitimate, important, real thing, even while having the fact of its subjectivity at the forefront of his mind. Hussein might try to say, like, hey, fictionalism will help you with that. It'll give you sort of you can, like, play a make-believe game. But the point here is you don't need to play a make-believe game. You love the thing so much that you can love it without a make-believe game. And I think that's what we sort of get in On Enjoying and Suffering the Passions, that just really makes Hussein's interpretation, as I see it, like, not, well, it makes the kind of passionate valuing that Nietzsche's talking about in Thus Spoke Zarathustra look a lot less awesome than it is. Okay, so now I want to discuss three of the sort of exciting, flashy things that show up in Thus Spoke Zarathustra. The concept of the overman first, the character of Zarathustra himself, and the eternal recurrence. And I'm going to connect him with the subjectivist view that I've offered here. First, the overman. Okay, so let me say this. A lot of contemporary Nietzsche scholars are like, the overman is not a central concept in Nietzsche's philosophy. And to a certain extent, I'm kind of okay with them saying that, because I think in sort of pop culture discussions of Nietzsche, like the Übermensch gets overplayed, and the reason this happens is it shows up at the beginning of Zarathustra, and so people who like get a copy of Thus Spoke Zarathustra, like, you know, read the Zarathustra's prologue, and there it's all about the overman, and then like their friend calls, or like, you know, like they've got to like write the paper or something like that, and they don't get to reading the rest of the book, and they think it's all the overman, and so like that becomes the thing. Okay, overman, not all of Nietzsche's philosophy, I think. But the interesting thing is, a lot of scholars have now been kind of like, oh yeah, it's not a big deal, it just shows up in this one place. Actually, they're wrong about this. There are no more like extended, like intensely overman-focused like discussions where like someone comes up and says like, yes, this is all about the overman, and like just talks a lot about this figure. But the term overman comes up at least, I counted recently, it's about a dozen times throughout the rest of the book, and always in a relatively positive way. It's kind of like, my brothers, how should you like pursue family life? Well, you should want to like, you know, give birth to the overman. It's like all these kinds of things that are all overman directed all across the course of the rest of your life. So it seems to be a pretty big deal. Who or what is the overman? Well, the trouble is that section at the beginning. This is one of the reasons why scholars are kind of not putting too much weight on it. It doesn't tell us that much concrete stuff about what the overman is like. It's all, the overman is awesome, the overman is awesome, he's the awesome thing that's going to show up. But what are the details here? Why is the overman awesome? What exactly is the overman even like? We don't see much there. So here's the two things that I can tell you about the overman. First of all, let's look at the contrast between him and the last man. The last man is sort of this figure that Zarathustra sets up in the prologue as sort of the opposite figure. He says like, you know, things could go the overman way, or here's the bad way, the last man. The distinctive feature of the last man is a lack of any strong passions whatsoever. He pursues small pleasures and lacks any interest in striving for anything, because striving requires too much exertion. So here's this kind of like person who doesn't do very much, doesn't strive for anything, striving requires too much exertion. What's the opposite of that? I guess a person with really strong passions, who is pursuing things in an intense, forceful way, and exerting lots of effort and trying to accomplish great things. So that's one thing, but I think the really like interesting and detailed account of the psychology of the overman actually shows up at the end of the second essay of the genealogy of mortals. So this essay is about the way that the feeling of guilt, or as Nietzsche calls it there, the bad conscience, arose in human beings. So how did guilt arise? Well, what happened is human beings had all these aggressive drives and instincts. And then, as they moved sort of into certain kinds of social arrangements, they couldn't exert these aggressive drives and instincts against each other, because they'd get in a lot of trouble for that. You just can't go beating people up in society. Now, what happened then was these aggressive drives and instincts turned inward against parts of the person himself who had these aggressive drives, and particularly against one's own instincts that led one to like do prohibited actions and get in trouble. As Nietzsche writes, hostility, cruelty, joy in persecuting, in attacking, in change, in destruction. All this turned against the possessors of such instincts. That is the origin of